Welcome to the Navy Memorial SITREP Speaker Series, and thank you very much for joining us. As you know, the mission here at the Navy Memorial is to honor, recognize, and celebrate the men and women of the sea services, past, present, and future, and to inform the public about their service. This program is about that fourth verb, to inform the public. Today's live, interactive, online program is on the record and available to people across the country. As you can see on your monitor or your tablet, you're able to ask questions as we go through the program. I have a tablet here next to me, and I'll be looking at the questions, and as I can, I'll try to integrate your all's questions into the program. We're honored today that our guest is Vice Admiral Kelly Aeschbach, the Commander of Naval Information Forces. Before I introduce her, though, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Navy Mutual Life Insurance. We could not do what we do without their support. Navy Mutual provides affordable life insurance and annuity programs to those who serve and those who have served. So it's now my honor to introduce Admiral Aeschbach, the commander of a new type commander, Naval Information Forces. Admiral Aeschbach is a career intelligence information officer with a background in intelligence. She served with amphibious forces. She served with Navy land-based aviation as well as carrier aviation. She has extensive experience in the Pacific as well as Europe with Special Operations Command and here in Washington. As a flag officer, she's been the Deputy Director of Intelligence for U.S. Forces in Afghanistan, Director of Intelligence for U.S. Strategic Command, the Director of the National Maritime Intelligence Integration Office, and most recently as the Commander of the Office of Naval Intelligence. She's now the Commander of Naval Information Forces, a type commander created in 2014 and similar to the other three type commanders, Naval Air Forces, Naval Surface Forces, and Naval Aviation Forces. Admiral Aeschbach, welcome to SITREP.
Thanks, Frank. It's great to be here this afternoon. Thanks for having us.
Well, thank you. Let's jump right in. So the type commander across the board in the Navy is responsible for providing combat-ready forces to the Joint Commander. Can you first explain to us an overview of the type commander and specifically how it applies to what you do as the Commander of Naval Information Forces?
Certainly, Frank. I think most folks understand that the type command concept for the Navy, that those commands are responsible for manning, training, and equipping the forces that are under their responsibility. So in my case, I am charged and accountable for providing that manning, training, and equipping for the 20,000 information warfare professionals who work across our Navy every day. We are different from the other type commands in that we don't actually have platforms assigned to us, but we do support a number of operational commanders. I have Fleet Cyber Command, Commander 10th Fleet as one of the operational commands I support, the Office of Naval Intelligence, and then the Naval Meteorological and Oceanographic Command are aligned with us, and we ensure that they have everything they need to be operationally successful. Underneath them, they have 91 commands and detachments that are delivering information warfare capabilities globally. And so my staff's job is to ensure that all of those folks have the right people with the right training at the right time so they can deliver mission persistently across our Navy and also in support of the Joint Force. We also uniquely support all of the information warfare professionals who are assigned underneath the other type commanders. And so as you know, we have information warfare professionals who are on submarines, aircraft carriers, and ships. And so we partner with the other type commanders and work by, with, and through them to ensure they have the best trained information warfare people and that those individuals have the best equipment from an information related standpoint available to them on their respective platforms. And then finally, just in the last year, we were also tasked to take on advocacy for our maritime operations centers at all of our fleet commanders. And we have 9 of those globally. Those operations centers are the heart of what we do in terms of execution at the operational level of war. And because they are information-centric in terms of their systems and capabilities, we've been asked also to take on the man, train, equip advocacy for those elements as well.
So I think most of the viewers are probably struck with the number 91 and the vastness of the type commander. And And I will tell you, just the information domain that has changed over the last, I was going to say 2 or 3 decades, but I could probably say over the last decade, right? So you come into the Navy as an intelligence officer, now an information warfare leader. The complexity of what you do is probably is vast, but probably not understood as to what. So of all those organizations, how do you describe what your type commander brings to the fight?
So in the simplest terms, we are providing advocacy and delivering all information-based capabilities. And so you're right, the breadth of it is actually pretty startling if you think about it. We advocate for intelligence. We have cryptology, which includes signals intelligence, electronic warfare, and information operations. We also advocate for communications, which includes our networks and also our nuclear command and control capability for our portion of the nuclear triad. We also work cyberspace and anything that's related to maneuver in the electromagnetic spectrum. And we have space in our portfolio. And then finally, we have meteorology and oceanography. And so the breadth of what we've taken on in terms of information-related capabilities is broad, but we have found there's significant synergy in the commonality we have and how we're delivering capability, and the fact that we can now bring advocacy across all of those. We have 3 primary pillars that we look at in organizing our capabilities. We are providing for all the warfighting areas battle space awareness, which includes the deep understanding of the threat, and also the deep understanding of the environment we operate in, to include where we need to be under the water to be most effective. We provide assured communications, which, as you know, we can't do anything in the Navy if our commanders can't make the right decision at the right time and then effectively communicate that and send orders where they need to go. And then the final piece is that we're part of all integrated fires. And so if you want to put a weapon on target anywhere and have lethal effect in the Navy, you need some piece of information warfare in order to do that. And so those are the primary ways in which we're focused in ensuring the Navy has what it needs from our respective capability areas.
So I don't want to sound like a dinosaur, but I was driving ships back in the early 80s, mid 80s, and we did all that, right? What's changed and not in the broadest terms, but why can't the surface force do that? Why can't the aviation force train to do that? And then talk about the joint environment on top of all that.
Well, Frank, I would share your observation that 10 plus years ago, when I deployed as a Carrier Strike Group N2 as the senior intelligence officer in that group, we were in a very much more benign environment afloat. And my biggest challenge at the time in my supplementary plot, which does indications and warning for a Carrier Strike Group, was actually keeping the intelligence specialists and the cryptologic technicians who were on the watch awake, because there was not a lot happening in the maritime environment at that time. We were flying missions over Afghanistan, but we were really not challenged in the maritime. And our competitive environment, as you know, our global competitive environment has changed substantially. And we are now facing a near-peer competition, and in some areas we're being outpaced by our competitors that I think demands now that you need information warriors to deliver our capability full time. I'll use the submarine as an example where historically, my dad's actually a retired submarine officer. Submarines did a lot of what you talked about. Submarine officers did all of the information related stuff as collateral duty. But they are in a competitive environment now, and they need to be focusing full time on the mastery of how they operate most effectively under the sea, and that they outcompete others who might want to operate in the same space. They need us to come and deliver our capability full time, because our competition is also focused on mastery of information warfare. And so I think there's a greater demand for us and a need for us to specifically deliver that and allow everyone else to focus on the specific functional capability that they bring and excel in that area. We're a better team for it if we're there bringing the deep information warfare capability.
So not to continue the theme of me being old school, but I think of type commanders, I think of platforms. And the Air Boss brings carriers and brings aviation to the battle. Your job is affectionately called the I-Boss, the information boss, the I-Boss. What are your platforms?
So our platforms are our people, and generally they come in the form of teams. So I'll use the Cyber Mission Force as an example, where we are charged with training individual folks who come together in a way that when they operate as a team and they're equipped with the software and other tools they need on the network, they can perform and deliver potentially lethal effects. We have a similar concept across all of our operational shore commands, where we're working 24/7, providing watch standing capability, and often are fully integrated with units that are deployed forward. And so I mentioned before that I was out with a supplementary plot doing indications and warning. Those elements that are out on our forward ships are connected real time to my operational shore commands, where they are getting additive analytic capability, overwatch and support that allows them to be more effective in understanding their battle space, whether that's in terms of the threat or that's in terms of the weather or environment around them, or in understanding what's happening across the electromagnetic spectrum and how they can use their communications. And so we do a lot in terms of reach back and integration that actually has us operating in a way that the other way we're different from platforms is we don't have the standard sustainment cycle. We are operating all the time, and so one of the challenges we have as a type commander is how do you do the care and feeding and regeneration of a force that is always in demand? And so that has challenged us in terms of how we maintain appropriate operational tempo for our personnel, effectively train them, and afford them enough time to recharge, be most effective and most ready for the missions they're supporting.
How do you do that?
Well, we've actually been looking at that with the Cyber Mission Force in particular as our starting point. We're actually conducting some studies right now on what is the right tempo with which you should be on the net and off the net, because we actually don't have a definition for that. And we actually are trying to apply a force generation model similar to what we use in aviation and surface warfare, where for every one team we want to have on the net, we actually have 3 teams that we're maintaining. And so one team is at full operational capability, a second is arguably working up for what we want them to do, and then we've got a third where we afford them that regenerative period where they can rest, they can get training, they can take vacation. We're still refining that and how that works. We're hoping that has application for the broader force because it is one of the concerns we have for our folks is just the burnout in terms of persistent demand. Because we are treated as, people have a view that we're on shore duty, but the reality is we're working 24/7 and we're fully integrated at a tempo and demand that's actually driven by units that are generally operating forward.
So when you talk about this on demand, I'm trying to picture the sailors doing this. And our picture of a sailor is somebody working on the decks, a fire control technician, an operations specialist, a quartermaster. What is the role of an information warfare specialist?
Okay. So in our in information warfare, we have 8 enlisted ratings or specialists. And we do rely on them for deep specialization because of the technical capability that we demand and also the analytic thought that's required in much of what we're asking those sailors to deliver or produce. Many of them are on platforms, so when you say on deck, many of them are working in ship spaces, but the nature of the equipment that they're working with, it's often communications related, it has a collections capability, it interfaces with the electromagnetic spectrum in a way that it can potentially gather signals, deliver signals, and so our sailors have to actually be pretty exceptional in their understanding of that environment and how they operate our equipment. And then they often are gathering information that they need to rapidly assimilate and make assessments about. And so I do think the standard or the level of critical thinking that we demand from our sailors is higher. And so I do think we're pressurizing them constantly in terms of their awareness and the thought they're putting into anticipating how do they best inform in their respective area so that their respective commander can respond.
So you've used a couple words in your discussions. You've used advocacy, that you're the advocate for the information domain of the Navy. And you talk about the people. It almost seems to me that this is a fast evolution of people's role in the Navy, of sailors' role. Not a revolution, not a flip a switch, but that operations specialist from 25 years ago, or that intelligence specialist, or that intelligence officer, their role with the revolution in technology has just grown so significantly. Is that a fair analysis?
I think that's a fair assessment, because I think the art of what we do and the practice is actually very similar to the success we've had going all the way back to World War II in terms of how we informed and provided advantage to commanders who were able to make more effective decisions because we gave them the right insights and the right information, and then we helped them most effectively put weapons on target. But because we are in such an information-saturated environment now, many of our professionals are under more pressure to find that right information and to put that puzzle together. That in some ways you'd think more information is better, but we're, our press and the way we're trying to work technology to help the sailors rapidly get to what is the key information, and then how do they spend their time actually assessing what it means. We still are a work in progress in that area. And so in some cases, yeah, the jobs are more demanding because there frankly is just a lot more going on in the environment. And then as I mentioned before, we have competition now. I mean, we used to have the advantage that we dominated the space, and frankly, we could take our time about how we assessed what was going on. And now, in a good and bad way, competition pressurizes us, and we have to be on our game. We have to be able to rapidly assess what's going on around us and keep a good accuracy on that information. And so that's exciting if you're in our profession, but that's also stressful in terms of the expectation of how we need to continually deliver so everyone else can be successful.
One of the hallmarks of the Navy is that mid-grade enlisted sailors are making recommendations to commanding officers to do things. It strikes me that that role has vastly increased with the level of knowledge that is both in the head of the sailor as well as at their fingertips and their ability to manipulate that. Is that also a fair assessment, that that the role of the sailor in the operational environment has also vastly increased?
Yeah, I think we have afforded the sailors really exciting operational opportunity, and they get a lot of autonomy at a very junior level. And because we're in demand, we also have positions now available to integrate in the fleet that we didn't have available 10 years ago. We have information warfare commanders now with strike groups and amphibious ready groups. We've been piloting the embed of information warfare officers, independent duty intelligence specialists, and cryptologists with submarines full-time. And we also have the new Fleet Information Warfare Command Pacific that Admiral Paparo requested be stood up to focus specifically on the integration of information operations in his whole campaign in the Pacific. And so really exciting new opportunities for our professionals, and then more opportunity for those that already existed. And so, for example, a destroyer often has a single independent duty intelligence specialist, which is often an E6 or a young chief. And they are it. They are the one who is charged with advising their commander from an intelligence perspective on the threat. And similarly, we have cryptologic technicians and information technicians who are on board and have tremendous responsibility in ensuring that there's good collection going on around the ship in terms of understanding the signals environment. And the ITs, the information technicians, are vital in ensuring the ship has the connectivity it needs to move information on and off the ship. And so, yeah, a lot of responsibility at a young point in your career that I think, and I'm biased, but I think makes our career field one of the most exciting ones, not just in the Navy, I think, but in the Joint Force.
So you're responsible as a type commander, organize, train, and equip. How do you what are you doing to bring that capability to the fleet, especially since it now sounds like Naval Information Forces owns it? I mean,
yeah.
What are you
Well,
doing?
I would say we own it, and I came in, enthusiastic and leaning in on. I want to be held accountable for anything information warfare related. I think the competition is so keen that we want to ensure that information warriors are training other information warriors and actually certifying them. And so one of the things that I've leaned into in the last 2 years is how do we further mature and align that we actually have that responsibility. And one of the examples 2 years ago when I came into the job, we were still not actually delivering all the information warfare training for our afloat forces. Because of our history, some of that was still happening under surface forces. And so we worked with them to transition all of those information-related capabilities over to my command and then are now writing the governance and instructions that will make us the certifier of whether you're really ready from an information-related standpoint. And that's just one example where we've been continuing to lean in on how we better align all of the information training, the information certification, and what we're provisioning afloat, that we've got really clear direct lines to my type command, and that we can rightly be held accountable by the fleet commanders if we don't actually deliver what's required.
So if I'm the surface force type commander, I'm building ships and nobody else is. I'm training, organizing, staffing ships. Nobody else is. You've got the information domain, and not only do you have the surface force, the aviation force, and submarine force focused on information, you also have the joint force. You also have Silicon Valley. You've got the nation, the world, China. How do you bring all of that together to ensure you're sending the right skill sets to that destroyer or to that Maritime Operations Center?
Yeah. So we've adopted some of the best practices that are actually used by the other type commanders. I have a N8 or a resource and requirement shop, and we actually actively work across the fleet commanders and receive through the joint side as well the roster of requirements and an identification of the gaps and new capabilities that are needed. And we have an annual process where we work with all the stakeholders to identify what does everybody need, are we on the right path, how do we rack and stack that, and then our responsibility is to send that up to OpNav and to our resource sponsor, which is N2N6. And say, hey, here's our list, 1 to N. This is what we need you to resource in order to make us a better fleet, a better Navy. But we do have an entire process that, in our case, involves a lot of stakeholders because of how much information warfare equity is invested in so many parts of the Navy. And as we've talked about, and I tell my folks, you can't do any warfighting mission without a piece of us. And so that does keep us pretty busy in how we integrate with others. Sometimes we'll run our requirements through the other type commanders if they're the better advocate for the capability. And so there's good partnership there. But we generally, if it's predominantly information-based, then we will take up primary advocacy to ensure that something is built, delivered, and that we develop training to address whatever the requirement is.
How is that going? I mean, that sounds great, right? But we're all used to the ship advocates being the ship advocates, the aviation advocates. It just seems to me what I've heard, the culture's changed. It's a different environment now that in the Navy just requires a whole lot more teamwork, collaboration. Is it working?
I think we're doing much better. My observation is that information warfare is fully embraced. Everyone recognizes the impact we can have. Everybody wants more of it. And we have processes now where we're trying to prioritize that we're making the kind of investments that will allow us to make a difference. Granted, we compete with everybody else in a resource constrained environment. But I think when I look back at the past 2 years of my tenure, we've had a number of successes in driving that kind of investment. And then I'll say on the SysCom side, and then from industry writ large, what we're seeing now actually is tremendous success in innovation and actually bringing new capability. And where we're running to catch up now is how do you deliver training fast enough, and then how do you make, frankly, ships and platforms available to actually integrate the capability, which is a good problem to have.
Right.
We have folks knocking on our door, and we have a lot of innovation going on. And so I think the real challenge now is how do we do better in terms of rapidly making everything available for upgrade. And so I think it's a good news story, but I'll agree with you. It remains challenging, and I certainly am pretty aggressive with my tin cup. And my argument that every dollar spent, if you could spend another dollar, I always tell the CNO that I think you should spend it in my area. So
there you go. Yeah. Admiral, we're going to take a quick break. We're getting a lot of comments on the platform about service. So people, there's some folks out there, some Vietnam veterans who want you to know they're out there. Also some interest in cyber. So when we come back, we'll dive into cyber and talk a little bit about what the Navy's doing in the world of cyber. Stay tuned.
The people we serve at Navy Mutual are like family. Navy Mutual is a nonprofit organization
that was founded in 1879.
Providing life insurance products,
service and education to members of the military service and their families.
We understand them because we have served ourselves.
Everything we do every day is about serving our members.
We treat them like we would treat our family.
It's all about the member.
Welcome back. Keep the questions coming. We're going to go to them here in a second. We've got a couple on cyber. I also want to comment on the veterans that have commented that you're out there. Thank you very much. And on behalf of the Admiral and I say thank you for your service. So continuing on the people and the training, as the iBoss, which I just have to tell you I really like that term. As the iBoss, what's your biggest priority when it comes to training the Navy information warfare world?
So Frank, my biggest priority right now is actually getting us integrated in live virtual constructive training. And the Navy's had an effort underway to shift all the training it does, particularly for the forces afloat that are working consistently to be ready for deployment, been trying to get that into the live virtual constructive environment. And I have a number of reasons I want to do that. One is that typically when we're out operating off of our local shores and preparing for deployment, we can't actually really operate our capabilities. We have to get special approvals because we use the spectrum. There's potential interference with U.S. interests, FAA, et cetera, that requires special approval, and that's hard to get. And so many of our capabilities we can't fully exploit when we're right off the coast. The second part is that even if we could get that approval, we have the kind of capabilities that frankly I don't think we want to fully operate them because we are being observed by competition now and we don't want others to know exactly what we can do. But we do want our sailors most ready. We need an environment like live virtual constructive where they can really work end to end on the capability and exploit it, because typically what happens right now, they get somewhat ready for deployment, but they don't really become masters of their systems until they're actually overseas and consistently operating them. And even then, sometimes overseas there's restrictions on how we operate and whether we can fully use the suite of capabilities we have. And that's only going to become more pressurized in the next 3 or 4 years because we are bringing a number of capabilities from a non-kinetic and kinetic perspective that will need exceptional proficiency and an opportunity for us to practice. The other thing that live virtual constructive will afford is a chance for us to see how those capabilities interact concurrently. Right now, we don't really have the chance to turn them all on at once. And as you know, if you let sailors loose in that kind of environment, you often might have more impact than you expected. You might have fratricide, but I think we'd have innovation, and we'd also learn some things about best practices and TTPs. And then finally, live virtual constructive actually would allow us to measure how sailors are doing. And so we'd be much more effective in the training we're delivering, that we know that Sailor X went through the first scenario, aced it, and can move on, but Sailor Y, needs more training. We'd have a record of that, and right now, frankly, we are very subjective in those assessments, and we white card a lot of outcomes, and I am concerned that we're probably a little optimistic sometimes about how we think we did when we're not really held accountable in a measurable way through live virtual constructive. So we're leaning in really hard there. It's going to take us a couple more years. We have like 25 programs of record that we're trying to transition in. And then the other problem with live virtual constructive right now is it doesn't actually provide a representation of the threat at the highest classification. So we're also trying to help the Navy bring in the highest level of classification so we can actually all practice across all warfare areas against a very realistic threat presentation.
So live virtual constructive, can we break that down? Because I have to tell you, those words just flowed right off your tongue.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think live, virtual, constructive. Can you break that down to a taxpayer or a congressman staffer who's trying to fund these programs? What does that
mean? So in layman's terms, it would be, and I don't want to simplify it too much like a video game, but it is essentially you can get on an electronic interface like a video game, and it will present itself like the piece of equipment or the GUI or whatever the real piece of equipment is that you'd be operating through. And then it runs a scenario or presents you with challenges in exactly the same way you would see it real time on your equipment. And so you're essentially allowed to game what would happen, and then it provides all the functionality of the system that you have for real, and so you can press all those buttons, you can test out all those scenarios, you can actually, virtually fire weapons and integrate and operate. It also can present the threat in numbers in ways that we can't do through real operational forces, and it can add friendly capabilities too. And so if you're a ship all by yourself sitting pierside, you can bring up a scenario that will make it appear that you're actually with a large group, which can then stress all your watchstanders on what's required in an actual integrated environment. And so it's pretty powerful. And I think, with this generation that's coming up, many of them have been in the kind of computer-based training environments, virtualized opportunities that our sailors tend to respond really well to these type of opportunities when they can be hands-on with a keyboard and interacting in a way that they're getting direct response and feedback immediately on how well they're doing so they can refine their capability.
So I'm struck back to my point about sailors at sea on the decks as a fire control, a missile tech, or so that digital native who's growing up doing this, it's probably the most appropriate place for them to roll into. But let me hold that thought. If we have time, I'd like to drill more into that. But let me talk, we're getting some questions on the platform about cyber. And I want to make sure we touch on this area before we finish. The Navy's role in cyber and what our cyber force looks like and why we need a cyber force in the Navy.
So all of the services are charged to provide capability for our national cyber mission force. And the Navy is responsible for presenting a certain number of teams in support of its own requirements, in support of Cyber Command and the National Mission Force. And then the way the responsibilities are divided up, the Navy primarily has cyber mission support for Indo-PACOM and also for SOUTHCOM. And so we have over 40 teams that we provision in support of that. And so we do have a role in ensuring that we have high caliber cyber professionals who understand how to operate on the net and can meet the requirements and the tasking on those various teams. There's different types of teams. Some teams are offensive in nature, where they are readying themselves to potentially deliver lethal effects on the net. Some are protective, where they're hunting forward and looking for threats that we need to protect against. And then some are what we call support teams, where they are actually building, I guess you could say they're looking for targets. And so they're developing the kind of background and doing the kind of research required to determine whether something is worth going after, and if you wanted to go after it, how you would get there, literally through the net. And so we do play a part in that.
Can you drill down more in that? Again, we all can visualize aircraft flying off of a carrier. We all can. We talk about foreign entities or non-government actors breaking into networks. We all deal with our own phishing emails. What are we Navy out there doing as compared to other services when we're a maritime-based focus? What are, and I realize I could quickly go into classified and specific examples, and I'm not trying to get you there, but to the average American, how do you explain what our ships and aircraft, what are we doing out there?
Okay. Well, I would tell you that the way we exercise in the cyber operations realm, most of the authorities for actual, what we would characterize as offensive activity, are retained by Cyber Command. So anything that Navy teams would be doing from that standpoint is typically under the authorities of Cyber Command. On our ships and our own platforms, where we're primarily focused is on our own defense, how we're protecting our assets from cyber intrusion. We're also focused on cyber awareness. We do collections from our platforms in order to have a better understanding of the environment that's out there. That includes the network environment. But we typically have to go through higher authorities if we were to do anything offensive. And so Navy is participating with the Joint Force, I think, in the development of a number of things, but many of those, to your point, yeah, are in the classified realm, and I couldn't talk specifically about anything from that perspective. But most day-to-day what we're doing, we're actually focusing on the care and feeding of our own force, though, and ensuring that it's not going to be vulnerable to any kind of cyber effect.
So as you're speaking, I'm reminded of Admiral Stavridis' book 2032, where there's a couple Arleigh Burke-class destroyers who can't communicate. So your role is to ensure that that ship can do what it needs to do. How do you train and equip to that requirement that is changing daily? How do you provide that to the warfighter?
I will say it's been a really dynamic environment, but we've had good partnering with the other type commanders and with our primary systems command, which is NAVWAR. Industry is supporting as well, and I think one of the things we're pushing really hard is how do we transition to have more agility from a communications perspective. And so we are being pretty aggressive about what are the ways in which we can capitalize on the new communications architectures that are available, the lessons we're learning from Ukraine in particular with the proliferation in low Earth orbit, the way they're communicating over there in support of their forces, I think has a lot of lessons that Navy's looking at, and how do we replicate and make that kind of capability available to the maritime force, I think is important. And then we also are pressing really hard for how do we become more agile in our ability to integrate software delivered capabilities and move away from being hardware dependent. And so much of our push with industry now is how do they deliver us software tools, software upgrades that can be integrated faster and are hardware agnostic, that allow us, like you're talking about, to evolve much more quickly, because as you're pointing out, the pace at which new capability is becoming available is actually fantastic. And where I feel challenged right now as a type commander, the calls I'm getting is we've often put new capability out on ships, and then we haven't figured out how to effectively train right away to it. And so one of the other appeals to industry and others who build these capabilities is how do you bring a virtual package point of presence training that's ready on demand at the point at which you install it? And how do we get our sailors jump started? Because we don't have time to go back to the brick and mortar. We want to be able to master that capability, much like when you get a new app on your cell phone. You want to be able to download, interact, interface, and move out. And our sailors are eager to do that. We've just got to give them just enough. And then we've got to figure out how to rush behind it to bring in whatever's required from a sustainment standpoint to keep it going. But I think we're doing better in terms of the accelerated pace with which we're integrating stuff. It's just the rest of our infrastructure is designed, based on the old model where we had years in some cases to prepare for how we were going to adopt a new technology. And now we're trying to figure out, how do you deliver something and literally adopt a capability within like a day? If we show up with it and can plug it in, can you make it work?
We're used to a cycle where you've got a maintenance period, you got all the latest technology, you train to it, and then you deploy with it. What you're saying is a week before you deploy, you could download a new version of a software.
We are moving to a place where we are trying to afford that capability, that if we have something that we think is going to be impactful, that we can get it on board and we can make it available to the sailors for use. And so we're demonstrating we can do that. The challenge is, then how do you provide the training and the opportunities so they can actually be effective with it? And that's where I think we're still challenged. Most of our young sailors are actually pretty adept that if we can give them sufficient virtual content or pair them with the right instructor for a few hours, they can master it. But I know personally myself, I'm not always very good at paying attention to virtual instruction. And so I think we're still trying to crack the code too on what is the most effective form of point and presence training, and how do you get folks moving out with some of the great capabilities that are available.
Wow. Let me go to the platform here. We have a question about your biggest challenges. What are your biggest challenges to interactively visualize, analyze, and support the operational commanders in real time? This almost sounds like somebody that works for you, maybe. In real time, and based on what you're saying, really, with a vast amount of information that exists today. So what are NAVI-4's biggest challenges?
Well, we talked already about one of our biggest challenges, which I think is the training piece, where we really need to get into live virtual constructive. A second challenge we have is that all the Navy processes are driven by how we measure what we call readiness. And I do think we remain challenged as a type command on how do you effectively measure and monitor the capability we're delivering, and how do you know it's at the level that you need it, and then how does that signal that we need to provide more? And I think we're still trying to figure out what are those metrics by which we can display that we have a sufficient number of people who have the right proficiency, in the right area, so then we can be responsive and we can compete, frankly, in the resource environment for more of what we need. And because we're shore commands and we're not traditional platforms, it's harder for us sometimes, I think, to identify what those metrics are and quantify what we're doing to be really effective in advocating. And if we can crack the code on that, I think the fact that we have a type command and we have advocacy would be even more powerful.
So there's a question here on the platform about contractor support. About let me start just asking, based on that what's industry's role here? When you talk about downloading a version of something that's coming from somebody or some development organization, so let me just ask an industry question. What's industry's role here, and how can they help you?
Well, I think industry's role, and I actually think some of them are excelling at it, is to remain innovative in the type of information-related capabilities that are going to allow us to advance. And so examples are on the AI/ML side, where, as I mentioned, we have so much information flowing in. You name a functional area we have, and we're drowning in it. What are the ways in which we can develop tools that allow us to sort through that information, rapidly process that information, and then preserve our sailors for the actual analytic thought required to determine what's happening? Because a lot of what we're doing right now is we're in sort of the mundane, having to parse or count ourselves because we don't have tools that can do that for us. I also think the advances we're seeing on the communication side on how we can continue to package data so it's potentially agnostic to how it flows, how we capitalize on all the different waveforms that have been developed, and how we bring things in small form and so that they can be easily adapted. And then again, if it's software that's hardware agnostic, that those are all ways that industry can be really powerful. And then the last one I put a plug in again for is how they think about training. They're masters of what they're delivering. How do they help us bring wholeness in the capability by when they show up and offer the capability, they also have a vision for how a user would adopt it and sustain it, that we could deliver quickly and we wouldn't be scrambling after the fact to figure out how to train to it.
So would the operators tell you that system is working fast enough? I mean, and maybe another way to talk about this is there, are you able to overcome some of the PPB budget processes and industry standards and your own standards and your own requirements, and able to get that capability to the operator in time, whereas it'll probably never be as fast as they wanted, but are you comfortable that you can get it to them in time, and what are you doing about that?
No, I think we're doing better, but I think we still fall short of moving at a pace that is allowing us to deliver the best capabilities at the soonest possible point. And it still takes us too much time in our process of development and what we have to go through from an acquisition perspective, and then what's required to develop training that we are often late to need. And there are several areas where we have capabilities coming that the sailors need now, and we don't have them, or we have improvements coming that are not there yet. And then we candidly have capabilities in the fleet where we don't have training yet. We're putting Band-Aids in some cases where we've come up with interim training because we haven't actually followed through yet or had the time to deliver the full training. We're doing better in that area, but I frankly think we just can't take our foot off the accelerator there. We have to continue to press at how do we deliver faster and most effectively, because often what's happening now is we are delivering fast, but then we're not delivering the whole package. We don't have a training program for it. We haven't thought about that it might need more people, and we haven't resourced that. And so we also need to get better mastery at the complete holistic view of, in order to deliver a full capability, you've got to have all the people, the funding, the sustainment thought about too, and not just the capability. So we continue to work on that.
Yeah, I would think speed's your best ally and your biggest challenge, right? I mean, and sticking with the industry thing here, just from a cybersecurity, the classification that you're working at too. So some great software or great capability company, they may not have the clearances. Are you able to work with the people in industry that you need to bring that capability to bear?
I think so, and I can't speak for Admiral Doug Small, who runs NavWar, but they do have a developmental approach now that is designed to afford industry a chance to come in at the right classification level and actually compete capabilities. Our classification issues do make it a little bit more challenging, and sometimes it makes it hard because there are obviously things we don't want to talk openly about in terms of what we're developing. And so I know that makes it challenging for industry sometimes to anticipate what they need to do for us. And so we also try to create forums where we bring industry in at a classified level, and we talk about how we see the threat and what our capabilities are, and they're appropriately cleared to hear that, so we can hopefully continue to promote the alignment and their efforts to help us.
Okay, we have a couple more minutes, and you mentioned AI and machine learning several times too, and some of the feedback I'm seeing and hearing is, how does that apply to what we do in the Navy? And what's the connection that the type commander is providing for us to be able to use AI/ML for the better warfighter?
Yeah. We actually have an effort in our type command, and every type command has one. Ours is called Task Force Station Hypo, but it is looking across Navy and the Joint Force for the best AI/ML solutions and how we could apply them or scale them inside information warfare. My primary interest is actually on some things that others might not consider that sophisticated, but I'm looking for anything that helps us manage information. Because I do think that our analysts in many areas right now still spend much too much time literally counting things or trying to sort their way through stuff, and we aren't spending enough time on the far end of what does it all mean. And that's only going to continue to increase the challenge of information coming. We're fielding platforms in a great way like Triton in the Navy. We're going to be collecting even more information, and we need to come up with ways that we assist the analysts to get through that information so they can focus on what the commander really needs to know about, and frankly set aside or let the algorithm automatically process the stuff that doesn't need the high-end analysis in terms of it's just numbers, and that's all we need to know. But so that's where I'm focused on. Where's the application? We've seen, when I was at Office of Naval Intelligence, we saw some promise in how we could do that and help analysts better identify things. But candidly, I think we're still challenged in how do we effectively scale and really make that impactful. And then I think we all are still wrestling with the trust in the algorithms. I think we're going to have to think about how we better educate folks in understanding. Somebody's going to have to know how those algorithms work in order to trust that they're delivering the information that we have. And so I think we need more practice with them too, to have the confidence that they're actually making the calls that are accurate, and that we can comfortably move on, to the rest of the story because we know the algorithm, has got it.
Yeah, so you just packed a whole lot of stuff into that answer, and maybe that's the second hour. But you mentioned Triton, and it's pretty exciting. Can you just talk to us a little bit more about Triton and what it brings to the fight?
Yeah, Triton is exciting. We're on a path from an unmanned perspective to deliver an intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platform. We have a new operational concept ashore on how we're going to process, exploit, and disseminate that information. And I think it's the leading edge of what we'll be doing for a whole suite of unmanned sensors that are likely to join the Navy over the next 15 to 20 years. And I think you'll see our operational shore commands play an even greater role in how we're receiving that data, how we're processing it, how we're getting it to the right place to inform decisions. And then more importantly, we're also providing all of the exquisite operational understanding around those vehicles so that we ensure you get your Triton back. They need exceptional battle space awareness, great weather support, et cetera. And so another area where there's an increased demand for information warfare, because you don't have a man or woman in the loop on that platform, you need a great set of folks in the operational center who can make exceptional assessments to ensure that that platform operates in a safe way and gets back to you in a timely way so you can use it repeatedly.
So that's an area that, I mean, I think people just take for granted. I take for granted. I see Triton operating or any other unmanned platform, but actually somebody's worried about not only flying it, but the environment that they're flying in.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I think some folks think unmanned means less manning. And unmanned means, you know, there's no one on the platform. In some ways, our support for those operations is more demanding, at least in my mission area, because you've really got to have an exquisite understanding of where you're operating it, and you have to do that at a distance. You don't have anybody in the loop now who can make an observation for you or operate a sensor directly on the airframe or the ship, you know, depending on if it's an unmanned ship, and make that assessment locally. You've got to do that in a remote way. And we've got some practice doing that, but I think it's another area in our career field that's exciting and is going to grow in terms of the vision our Chief of Naval Operations has for integration of unmanned across the force.
So, same number of platforms, a whole lot more information. And so back to your advocacy for information, how is it decided? I guess there's not one who, but how is it decided what information gets to who, when, and not even to say about who owns the algorithms, but I mean, how do you integrate that for the warfighter?
Well, you know, that's done at layered levels, you know, from tactical, operational to strategic. We have information warriors represented and integrated at all of those levels. And many of them are charged at their respective levels for ensuring that their respective commander has the information he needs at the time he needs it. And then we're connected in a way now that we can integrate the tactical picture with the operational picture. And so folks are communicating and testing each other in the validity and the questions about, is your picture the right picture? Do we agree on that picture? But that is happening with information warfare professionals, I think, at every level. And so there's multiple people involved in that who work to try and align our commanders so that they hopefully have a shared view, a shared understanding of what's happening.
So Admiral Aeschbach, I have to tell you, with a combination of folks on the platform who have talked about appreciation for what you do and the complexity of what you do, and the fact that many people watching today probably have sons or daughters or they're influencers themselves, I'm struck with that role of the sailor who's doing this mission that is, quite frankly, so complicated, but yet you bring it down to an individual, I can understand it, right? What's your advice on talking to those folks about the role of sailor? I mean, you're a parent, you've got two sons who you've encouraged to follow their own way. What's your advice to the folks out there about opportunities to be able to do this in the Navy?
Well, I personally think that we're the most vital and dynamic warfighting area. And so if you're interested in serving, my advice to young folks is to consider the impact you can have in information warfare in any role, because you get to be a warfighter in information warfighting, and you potentially get a chance to integrate in almost every other warfighting area. And so if you're interested in reinventing yourself, versatility, understanding the breadth of what the Navy does and the Joint Force, information warfare is a great way to do that. It also will provide you with a skill, whether that's in intelligence or cryptology or communications, that is marketable on the outside. You know, I've got eyes wide open that not everybody joins the Navy and stays as long as I've stayed. And so if you're going to join and get trained in something, we provide exceptional training and experience. You will be marketable on the outside as well and have really phenomenal capability that you can, you know, it's going to serve you well for your whole life. And so I think that advice. And then I would just offer that we offer really tremendous accession opportunity now across all the ratings and for our officers. You can come in through NROTC now, you can come in through the Naval Academy, Officer Candidate School. We have a baccalaureate degree college program where you can get paid as an E5, E6 as a junior or senior in college with a guarantee that you go to OCS after you graduate. And so there's just a number of ways, diverse ways that you can find your way to us. If you're not sure, you know, right away that you want to join, there's a number of ways you can eventually decide to sign up. But yeah, I think the experience is phenomenal. I think what we do in the Navy as part of the Joint Force is unique. We come from the sea. No one else does that. We do stuff under the sea that no one else does, and you can do that in information warfare. So I think it's incredibly exciting, and if any of our listeners can talk one person into joining, and even if it's just the Navy and not information warfare, then I'm appreciative. So.
Admiral, thank you. I promised you that we would wrap up in an hour. I also did throw in there could be a second hour. We're not going to do that today. But I would love to. So thank you very much. Anything you want to add before we wrap it up?
Well, Frank, I just want to thank you for allowing us to be here today. Like I've said many times, I think you know, competition is really challenging, but it has been good for the Navy and for information warfare in the sense that this is an incredibly rewarding career field. And the Navy is vital to what happens nationally. And so if you want to be impactful and you want to be a part of something that could really make a difference, I think that's our mission area. And then as we've talked about, we are all about people. And they are our weapon system. And I'm just interested in how do we give them the best training, because we have phenomenal talent and we owe them the best capability and the best training so they can be world class, you know, every day at what they do.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Admiral Aeschbach. Thank you, iBoss, for being here today, and thank you for doing what you're doing in this cutting edge area where every day we pick up the paper, and I'm not sure I fully understand it when I pick up the paper, but I know that we need to be out there, and we need to be on the cutting edge, so thank you very much.
Thanks.
And thank you all for joining us today. I appreciate it. I also want to thank again Navy Mutual Life Insurance for sponsoring today's event. We literally could not do what we do without their support. And thank you for all your support. As we're in the middle of summer here at the Navy Memorial, we have a lot going on. We have, here in DC, we have the concerts every Tuesday night through Labor Day, which are a great event, great family event if you have some time. We also have a great Bridge Wing chat coming up with the Chief of Naval Operations on July 31st. That's a registration-only event. And then the other one, while we have a bunch of other events going on, I want to mention is on September 15th, we're going to do a wreath laying on the third Friday of every year, mandated by Congress, is the POW MIA Remembrance Day. And that motto is never forget. And we do that wreath laying every year on the third Friday, which this year is September 15th. This year we're going to have a big event here with a movie screening about the continuing search of MIAs, and we'll do a wreath laying. If you're in the area, please join us. Registration event, please go to our website, and if you're online, we'll also have the online version of that wreath laying. And speaking of POW MIA, and I just want to stress the importance of never forgetting, this year we've got a commemorative coin that we're doing for the POWs and MIAs, and 50 years since the Vietnam POWs returned, and we should never forget that, as well as those families who sacrificed so much for POWs as well as those still missing in MIA. So thank you again for joining us. Admiral Aeschbach, thank you very much. And until we see each other again, I wish you all a fair winds and following seas.